Well, hi, my name is Mark Pugh, and I'm a member, co-founder of the Transitions. I'm really excited to be able to interview Michael Stack with AMAXX. I've known Michael for many, many years, and he has kind of single-handedly created a lot of educational resources for work comp. And that would be real interesting from Transitions to really talk about how to inform and empower people that are coming into the industry or that need to have a better understanding of the industry on how to do that. So, Michael, welcome. And if you want to get, for those people, the 3 or 4 people in the United States that don't know you already, can you go ahead and introduction?
Sure. Yeah, happy to be here, Mark. Of course, love the opportunity to speak with you at any chance I get. So happy to be here and thankful for the opportunity. So, a lot of what I do, and really, when you think about even the whole goal of the Transitions program, is really all about education. It's all about how do we bring on the new people to replace the experience and the knowledge that's going to be transitioning out of the industry. So when you think about actually what I do, it's really all about education. It's all about education, not only for new people, but it's for existing people as well. And just the foundation, the fundamentals of work comp. Work comp can be very complex in what we do. And it's just trying to make it simple, make it a step-by-step process. We know how to do it. We know the proven steps to do it, and we know how to make it easier than it has to be in some of the more complex claims. So that's really what my whole focus is. It's really about work comp education, work comp best practices. How do you create better injured worker outcomes while at the same time reducing work comp costs?
Perfect. And for those of y'all that haven't seen any of his programs, this is his background. He writes illegibly on a whiteboard all during his sessions. So
come on, you can read that. Come on.
Yeah, that looks like my writing, actually. So Michael, as we talked about, the Transitions, has been in some ways focused a lot on the exiting generation and the transition of institutional knowledge and all of this experience and expertise and kind of been there, done that, that's increasingly walking out the door. But we've got college graduates that are coming into the industry. We've got people that don't have access to the claims college that a lot of times, 20, 30 years ago, claims adjusters would have 2 or 3, 4 weeks of in-depth training before they even adjudicated the first claim. And now they kind of get in and they get their desk and they go, here's the 200 claims. Here's the steps that you got to go through and stuff. So how do you inform, how do you get people up to speed on something, as you said, is so complex and complicated, and especially for people who are dealing with multiple jurisdictions? How do you even break down something that complex into something simple that people can understand?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously it's a problem in our industry. It's a big issue in our industry, which is obviously why we're having this discussion. I think work comp can be very, very complex. It can be extremely complex when you look at 50 jurisdictions and you look at all kinds of state laws and you got all kinds of stakeholders and you've got a whole bunch of people involved in this process. And so it can be very complex. And where I think we get tripped up a lot of times is that a lot of times we stay there. We stay getting overwhelmed by the complexity of what our industry actually is and what we do. When I think about how do you bring new people in, where do you start? What is the kind of the foundation of where you start? It's understanding some of the root of what work comp actually is, going back to the grand bargain and understanding what that is. And, we talk about, kind of how that started, and kind of a funny story about that is when they first created it, they're like, oh, this should be a pretty simple deal. Like there's not that much to it. The employees get wage loss and they get their medical, and the employers get to have the ability to budget and have some risk transfer and all that kind of stuff. This shouldn't be that complicated, but obviously we've made it very complicated. So when I think about how do you bring people in, it's looking at some of the simplicity, the simplistic aspects of what we talk about in our industry of what we're trying to do. And in marketing, we've talked about this so often. It's thinking about how do you actually create a better outcome for the injured worker. If I was hurt, or my spouse was hurt, or my kids were hurt, or my friend was hurt, how do I want them to be treated? And now you're setting yourself up kind of from a mindset standpoint to go in. And I think that gets so easily lost in so much of what we do, because so much it is complex, but the real core concepts, I think, get lost very, very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, well, I had the opportunity to use your Foundations of Work Comp recently and went through that, and that encouragement of addressing the humanity
Yeah.
Not claimants. They are injured workers, but ultimately they're human beings. I like the concept of the whole, not trying to eat the whole elephant at once. So
Yeah.
if you were to start eating the toenail and then, the portion of the tail and then, the different, what are maybe the foundational, what are maybe 3 or 4 or 5 foundational simplistic kind of things beyond kind of the ground bargain? What are the things that you would gravitate to that grabs people's attention, that kind of distills things down into something that they can then build on?
Yeah. So you mentioned the foundations course. It's a great course. It's a great course to kind of get people started. And I found it's very beneficial for people that are not only just new, but people that have been in the industry for a while that want to understand how all the puzzle pieces come together. But when you talk about, how do you start to build on these things? And so where I look and where I, talk with employers and adjusters and people involved in the industry, where do you make the most impact? And WCRI has done a lot of studies on this as well, as far as worker outcome studies and what actually makes the difference in the claim. And so that's where you start. Okay, what is the biggest things that impact our outcome? All right, we know that it's the amount of trust in the employer and employee relationship. We know that it's how they're communicated with. It's how their expectations are set. If we know these things, one of those worker outcome studies, another was English language proficiency, which again comes down to understanding. And so it's a lot about expectations, understanding the amount of trust in that relationship. So if we know those things, let's start there. If we know that's what makes a difference at the end, let's begin with the end in mind. Let's start at the beginning. So that's what comes down to communication. How are we communicating with people? How are the supervisors responding to those injuries at the time of injury? It's such a massive impact on the claim, just how that supervisor says. So if you come to me and I'm your supervisor and I tell you, you're going to get in trouble for filing this claim, or I'm going to fire you, or you're not going to get a promotion, or don't file the claim, things like that. Of course, I'm not going to feel good about that. And so when you start to think about what makes a difference at the end, now let's think about these systems at the beginning. So it's communication, it's supervisor training, and then it's really setting people up for our main goal in work comp, which is getting them back to work and getting them back to function.
Gotcha. So what I heard you say is it's less about the technical competencies and filing this form, but it's more about guiding principles that then you can build upon the techniques and the tactics and then compliance and stuff like that. Did I hear you right?
Absolutely. And that's when, when we opened our conversation, it's like, there's so much complexity in the forms and the filings and the 50 state laws and all this stuff, and you can just get way overwhelmed with it, and you're getting lost in a lot of that, kind of minutia a lot of times. Not that it's not important. We do need to do those things correctly. We need to file stay up to date with the regulations and all those elements. But what matters is super simple. It's the stuff that's the simplest things that make the most impact when it comes down to communication, setting expectations, responding with care at the time of injury. I think about, I've got 4 kids, and so the kids get hurt a lot. They hurt themselves all the time. And I think about the story, one of my
what is your safety program at home? Let's stop right there.
I don't know. They're running around in the yard. They're having a good time. They're having a lot of fun. But it was a funny story, and I remember this well because I remember writing a blog about it. One of my daughter, when she was younger, she fell out of her bed, during the night, and so of course she's crying and things, and she's hurt. And that same response as a 3-year-old needs at that time. What does she want? All she wants is to give her a hug and tell her that it's going to be okay, and we're gonna, she's going to be fine, and you sit with her for a minute, and now she goes back to sleep right away. Same thing, as a human being, as a 3-year-old versus a 30-year-old versus a 50-year-old. Obviously, you're not going to give him a hug and put him back in bed, but that same idea of we're going to care for you, we have a plan here. That just sets up that level of trust, and then you're off to the races with managing the rest of that claim.
I think that's a great concept, and that's not typically what we think about, because we typically think about diving into the deep end and explaining the forms and the statutory differences and stuff. But if you take a step back and think about the guiding principles, which is something that is really interesting and important to the next generation. So yeah. I know you haven't been in work comp all 104 years it's been available, but it just kind of seems like it. But what kind of trends have you seen in regards to education, in regards to properly equipping let's just leave it at kind of claims adjust. I mean, there's a billion and one
Yeah.
jobs in work comp, from HR to risk management to, let's just think about claims. What have you seen as far as trends? Have we gotten better? Have we gotten worse? Have we just gotten different in how we encourage and empower these people to actually be successful on day one?
Yeah, and in the unfortunate reality, again, I know we've talked about this, Mark. It hasn't gotten better. It has gotten worse in the sense of, a lot of people in our industry will talk about, oh, you remember the good old days, and we would used to go, we would spend weeks at a time, and we do all this training. And today the world has gotten faster. It's just a faster world in general, and you see that in so many aspects of what we do. We're asked to do a lot more with a lot less, and then that's true in so many different aspects of our world today. But unfortunately, that's negatively impacts the claims adjusting world, and because the claims adjuster is a hugely important job and a hugely important piece of this puzzle here, and they're kind of a lot of times thrown into the fire and dealing with all the regulatory issues in the 50 states and the jurisdictions and all kinds of stuff. And then we're asking them to do some of the care piece and coordinate them with employers and educate the employer, because the employer doesn't know what to do either. And it's a really big job that they're doing, and we're oftentimes not equipping them, unfortunately, as well as I think we probably could.
So if you were a supervisor and you've got a claims adjuster, let's say that they are a recent college graduate, this is their first white collar job. Maybe they've done some interns, maybe they worked at fast food or whatever, but this is really like their first legit come to an office. They don't really know anything in work comp. Let's say that they didn't have risk management. They didn't, as happens with most people in work comp, they didn't decide to join work comp. Work comp selected them.
Yes.
Let's say someone comes in kind of a blank slate and you're their supervisor. What on day one, what in that first hour of that first day up until lunchtime, what is going to be the things that you would want to impart upon them? And you kind of broach the subject with guiding principles, but what are those hard foundational building block kind of things that you're going to spend that first moments of work comp with them on?
It's a great question, and it leads me back, and we've kind of talked about it already. I mean, what I would talk with them about first, before I got into any of the laws, before I got into any regulations, any forms, any of the 50 states, I would talk with them about what work comp actually is. Kind of the foundation of it. What is this thing actually built on? It's so much about human behavior management. It is really what makes the biggest difference in the world for that claim. It's you're going to make it either really easy on yourself or you're going to make it really hard on yourself, depending on how this thing goes really right at the beginning of the claim. And so I would talk with them about that. I would talk with them about everything that we've talked about already, the communication elements, what are the predictors of injured worker outcomes, and I would review those studies. I would talk about those different elements of what matters in workers' compensation. What are we actually trying to do? And take them back to the grand bargain of what it actually means, that it's here to be able to compensate someone for when they get hurt, replace their wages, and help them get back to work, get back to function. And that's really the foundation of what we're doing. And if we can do that with care, and I would impart this on them, with a big sledgehammer over their head, that when you do this thing right, when you really do this right, when you care for the injured workers, when you really look out for them as if they were your family or your friend, you're going to keep your costs really low. And so it's a huge win-win. And if they can understand that philosophically, what that means, that, hey, you're going to go into this job, and it's an awesome job because, where else do you get to really both drive down costs and care for people? It's like a huge win-win situation. So if you do your job really well, you're going to be able to help people and you're going to keep costs really low. And so everyone really wins. So I would really philosophically have them buy into that. And if they can buy into that, then they can get really excited about what they're doing, because now they're changing, you're impacting people's lives. And that's that to me kind of fires me up. You're impacting people's lives. You're helping them when they need help. And that could really now start to drive then the why behind what they're doing, because then before they get wrapped up and bogged down in all the legislation and the forms and all this stuff, remembering the why and the humanity of what we're doing and the purpose behind it, I think is super motivating. And so that's where I would spend a ton of time right out of the gates, to have them buy into that and get excited about it. Because if you can get excited about that, then you're really set up for success.
Gotcha. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Start with the why and then start building the how.
Yeah.
on top of that. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about someone who's been in the industry for 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, and has naturally developed a cynicism. I've been around a long time. You've run across those people that they just assume all injured workers and malingerers. They just assume all applicants' attorneys are just chasing the money. They just assume that doctors are after a fee for service and will do stuff, whatever will help pay their mortgage. You know, they just seem, and what they don't understand is that's maybe 1%, 2%, 5% of the overall, but those are such deep scars that they just kind of come in, walk into it and assume that that's the case. How do you break that from an educational standpoint? How do you break those bad habits? How do you break that that bias, those perceptions that are kind of baked in? So the first time they see a claim, they just kind of assume, stuff. How do you break that down? That they have already gone kind of down the path of, well, here we go again.
Yeah, and I've seen it. I've seen it a bunch. I know you've seen it a bunch. Anyone that's been in the industry, it becomes prevalent. And you start thinking about this, and we were talking about this before this call, is you start thinking about people as claim numbers. You think about it as, XYZ 123, 95 is the claim number, and rather than the person. And I think that's when you really start to get off the tracks. And I think, how do you break that? It's a great question. And the only way you do that is with education, and then I think also with experience, and also with stories, because we're so motivated by stories and oftentimes, just like the news, you turn on the nightly news, you're going to hear the bad stories all the time. They're so prevalent. It's the same thing that tends to happen in our minds. Humans we're just conditioned oftentimes to pay more attention to the bad stuff. And so even though it's 1%, 2%, 5% you talked about, the numbers are really low of those really bad stories. And it's not to say that they don't exist, because they do. There are bad injured workers. There are bad applicant attorneys. There are bad employers that aren't doing their part. They're not holding up their end of the grand bargain here. So, it's naive to think that those things aren't true, that they don't actually happen, because they do. To me, it's more about trying to focus on what are the things that we know work. And the more that you do those things that you work, and the way that I like to pitch this to employers is, you have to kind of have both things. So you kind of have to be warm-hearted. So you have to understand this idea that it's empathy and care and trust and all these different elements, that you need to go in with the expectation that everyone is going to be a good person. So if you can come in warm-hearted, you're going to be setting yourself up for success. But you also have to be tough-minded at the same time. And I think that's where it comes within work comp. You need to really have both of those, because there are a time when you need to have a very strong work comp defense program. You need to have a very good investigation program. You need to have very good programs, because not everybody is going to hold up their end of the deal. There are going to be people that are doing things poorly. And so from a systems standpoint, if you set up your systems well, you can have both. You can communicate care. You can have your supervisors respond properly. You can do all these things really well, out of the gates, and really set that claim up for success, assuming the employee is going to hold up their end. But if they don't hold up their end, you have systems for that as well. You've got a strong defense. You've got a very good defense system. You're taking a good recorded statement. You're doing all these things well. And the nice thing about that, again, I think the most beautiful thing about our industry is that if you do things right, if you do care, if you do investigation, if you do all these things right, it actually sets you up well for the tough-minded piece, because now you've got good information, and now you know that the person actually hurt their knee. They didn't hurt their shoulder, or they didn't twist their back, because you have the mechanism of injury very properly documented. And so you have all these systems in place. And so I think, going in the mindset of warm-hearted and tough-minded, and the fact that if you have good systems in place, you can really do both and really create a good outcome.
I love the warm-hearted, tough-minded. It reminds me of trust but verify.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's a little bit different. And I think you're absolutely right. If you start with the warm-hearted, start on the assumption that everybody is after the right thing, is doing the right thing, has the right motivations in part, but you also have the structured process. So if things, as soon as you identify things that aren't being done, that you identify those bad apples, whether it be the employer misclassifying the employees, or the doctors, or the whatever, just name them, certain providers. I mean, everybody has, once you identify that, then you've got a process in place that makes that joining easy. So it sounds like you've got a plan for for new people coming in brand new, starting them,
Yeah.
the guiding principles. You got to plan for those who've developed a cynicism over time, and that warm-hearted, tough-minded approach. What about the old farts like me that are going to be riding off into the sunset, and that institutional knowledge? How would you recommend divesting them of that, and codifying it and passing that knowledge on? So all of that, you can't obviously take their gut experience. You can't take their instincts away that they've developed over 20 or 30, 40 years. But there's a lot of stuff that you can't. How do you get that out of them and then inculcate that in your culture or in mentees or other people in their organization, so that expertise doesn't walk out the door and now you don't have that anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's another great question, and it's, to me, it's about being intentional about it. Obviously, that's what we're doing here together, is being intentional about the process. Because if you put some thought into it, if you have a clear goal of what you're trying to accomplish, then start with the why, and the how oftentimes reveals itself. That's kind of step one, is okay, that's our goal. We want to pass on this knowledge. So that to me is kind of step one. Is one, let's be intentional about it. And then two, it's about setting up, again, a process or a system for that. What does that look like at your organization? If you're an organization and it's not a surprise that someone's going to be retiring in an X amount of time. And so, we have a lot of time to plan for that. Is it a, Tuesday lunch meeting that you're having with new people coming in? Is it a Friday Zoom call? Is it some sort of systematic, structured way within your organization to carve out some of that time? Because it doesn't have to be 40 hours a week that we're doing this. It needs to be, here's, particularly if someone's been in the industry for a long time, they know what works. They've cut through the weeds. They're like, okay, let me save you a bunch of time, and here's the things that work. And so let me show those to you and tell those to you, and impart those upon you, and answer your questions. And so it's just a structured time, I think, is one of the ways to make it happen. Because if you don't put it in your calendar, if you don't structure something around it, then the wheels keep turning and the world keeps running, and the world's running faster and faster and faster and faster. And then all of a sudden the retirement day is there, and I meant to get to that, but I just didn't have the time to do it. Shoot. And it doesn't happen. So it's just, I think, about being intentional and structuring them.
Great points. Great points. Is there anything that we haven't talked about as a legit educator that just burning you? And you've done videos all over. There's probably not any unspent words in the Stack household. Is there anything burning that you want to kind of get off your chest as far as the importance of education and equipping people to be successful?
I think the big piece there, and I think the main takeaway, and I see this so often, is that work comp is very complex. There's a lot to it, but we also know how to do it. This is not a brand new program. This program's been around for over 100 years. We know how to do it, and we know what works, and we know what systems work. Where I find the biggest challenge is what we were just talking about. The how do you impart knowledge, is that there's so much going on in people's lives and business lives and professional lives, and all kinds of stuff going on in the world. The news cycle as fast as could possibly be, and there's things hitting us all the time. And so we know how this is done, but oftentimes we don't take the time to think about it. Like, you get a little bit above the weeds and you're like, oh yeah, I could see what's going on here. We get so lost in it, and we're just overwhelmed by it, and we're overwhelmed by claims and drama and jurisdictional stuff, and we're overwhelmed by all this stuff. But if we take a couple of minutes, just like we were talking about with the imparting the knowledge, if we're intentional about taking some time to look at the way we're doing it, and if we say from a systems or a structure or a strategy standpoint, we can avoid a lot of problems if we did this, kind of right up front. And that would cut off a whole bunch of challenges that we're facing and just make ourselves more efficient. So, the thing that I see the most is just taking some of that time for strategy, taking some of that time to actually, as Stephen Covey says, sharpen the saw, making sure that saw is sharp so you could chop down that tree just a lot more efficiently. And I see it's just so bogged down in the industry that we don't take the time to sharpen the saw. But if we do, then we save ourselves a huge amount of time.
hmm I think from that and what you've also already shared, it's really about intentionality. It's not, this stuff doesn't just happen by chance.
Yeah.
Yes, it could. I mean, there are people that are lucky and not good, right?
Yes.
The right place at the right time. But the vast majority of good stuff that happens is done because it's strategically thought through, that it was intentional. And NFL quarterbacks, they always talk about, and in other sports as well, where the sport slows down. It's not
Yeah.
that the players are moving slower. It's just that they're able to process things because they've seen so much that when
Yeah.
they see stuff, they're not rushed. They've been equipped. They've done the book study. They've been out on the field so long that they understand and things slow down. And when they slow down, they make better decisions.
Absolutely.
I think that's really what you're trying to do is to impart, is to slow down, maybe literally slow down, take
Yeah.
a breath, strategize about how to educate and empower your people.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great analogy because, as you said, they've seen the formation before. This is not the first time the defense has played this formation, but you've got to be able to recognize it quickly and know what to do, at that time. And the more you're trained up on that, so it's like that offensive strategy has already been defined. You know how to beat it by whatever play you're supposed to do, and that's kind of the same idea. It's a great analogy because we know exactly what to do. This is not a new program. WorkComp is not new. We've been working with employers, implementing systems successfully for years and decades. It's, the strategy is not new, but the ability to implement it, the ability to execute it, is the biggest challenge. It's as you said, it's about being intentional and about understanding that strategy is, this is what we have to do. But also, you can't do it all at once. It's, you said, biting it one at a time. It's about prioritizing that too. That's a major piece of win with this too, is you got to be able to take it step by step, because if you try to do it all at once, you will fail 100% guarantee, and you won't keep going. But if you get a little win and you get a little win and you get a little win, all of a sudden, after a period of time go by, you've had a lot of wins, and now you've really had some big success.
Absolutely. Well, I knew this would be a very great conversation because you've got so much experience in educating people. And I don't know, I'm pretty confident that the industry doesn't do a good job of strategizing in regards to education. There are certainly a lot of people that do, but I think by and large, we put claims adjusters really at a disadvantage in throwing them into the deep end, and not even with floaties, right? We just kind of throw them in there after they've eaten a really big meal, right? And then we that they're gonna be able to float. So I think if we slow down and intentionally, strategically figure out how to encourage and empower new people coming in, how to kind of take the cynicism out of those that have been here for a while,
Yeah.
and also to extract the institutional knowledge from those that will be walking away, the industry is going to be a whole lot better as a whole.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing, the benefit, obviously there's a lot of challenges with the people transitioning out, but the benefit is that you can maybe start to reframe the mindset of the people that do come in, and really get rid of some of that cynicism, really dive into this. The advocacy model obviously has taken hold here in the last several years, that general philosophy and mindset and strategy and approach to claims. So if you can really impart that on the new incoming generation, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing that they can really now start to make and change the overall culture and dynamic of the entire industry. Now you're really making a major, major impact. And I think it's a good opportunity for the new people coming in.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you joining me and imparting your knowledge. And can you give everybody your contact information in case they want to talk with you more about kind of your strategies and tactics and philosophy?
Yeah. Easy way to contact me is via email. So it's M as in Michael Stack, which is STACK at reduceyourworkerscomp.com. It's probably the longest email I think that anybody has, but that's our website address as well, reduceyourworkerscomp.com. So all kinds of stuff. I write a blog, I do video blogs, I do trainings, I've got the foundation course, we have the certification program, we got all kinds of stuff on there if anyone's interested in learning more.
Well, it's a very self-explanatory website as from the name is concerned. So
Yes,
great.
for sure.
Thanks, Michael. Really appreciate it, dude.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to talk with you.
All right. Take care.
All right, you as well.